Good afternoon. I am Chad Bresson, and I am pastor at the Table of Los Fresnos. How is Friday? How's your week been? I hope that you've had a good week. It's the end of the work week, but today, of course, is different, right? It's not only the first day of May, it is also the first day in which some of the restrictions have been lifted. There's a little bit more mobility today, and I already have heard from some people that are checking out this new sense of mobility and what that means. Things are a little confusing, and we're going to be navigating this new normal now for the next few weeks. This restrictions being lifted, but not quite all of them yet. It's interesting. Restaurants can now seat 25%. Masks are still being encouraged, but that means if you're at a restaurant and you're eating, you're probably not eating through your mask, right? So anyway, and then there's also worship. Some of you have been asking me, when is the table going to meet again? And I can tell you we're making some preparations, and we're planning. It's not going to happen this Sunday, but the table and the team we're talking about it, and hopefully we'll have a decision sometime next week about that and what that will look like. And I can guarantee you we will give you a lot of information about how that will happen, what will be expected, and just how the whole thing is going to flow. We'll make sure that we communicate our plan and what's going to happen with table worship. I can also tell you that we are going to have drive-through communion sometime next week at Memorial Park here in Los Fresnos. I haven't figured out which day that is yet, but we will have that. So stay tuned here on our Facebook page for that. I thought today, as we move into a new normal with this sheltering in place, no longer really being shelter in place, I thought it'd be good to look at 1 Corinthians 13. I think this is an appropriate passage for today, at our first day of the new normal, because it's also confusing. You know, we're living between these ideas of should we or shouldn't we? How much do we do? Mask, no mask. People in our home versus having still and continuing to have nobody in our home. All these questions kind of come up to the surface now, and they're a little more in front of us as we move into the new normal. And this doesn't even begin to address all the other confusing messages and ideas that we're confronted with regarding coronavirus, COVID-19, drugs, vaccines, timelines, threat versus no threat. It's a bit of information overload, and it has been for the past few weeks. And now that's being exacerbated as we move into a new normal. And what I find is now we have people who are jockeying to control the narrative. And the narrative is so elusive at times, I think, and that's why we're coming to 1 Corinthians 13, people jockeying to control the narrative of what should be true and what is normal. But the narrative is elusive enough, I think it warrants humility. And so we're coming to 1 Corinthians 13, because in the midst of it all, I think we need to remind ourselves of love and grace. And that has been a constant refrain, something I keep coming back to over the past few weeks, that we're not simply here and we're not simply living for ourselves. We're here for Los Fresnos. We are here to love our neighbor. And that much is true regardless of what narrative that we're following to help us understand all of this. That particular narrative for us is true. You will know each other by your love. And so 1 Corinthians 13 is a place I come to. Now, we've been doing Mythbusters on Saturday, and I thought, well, as we're looking at 1 Corinthians 13 today, there's a bit of myth busting here. So today's a freebie. Did you know that 1 Corinthians 13 was not written as a wedding text? That's when we hear it most, right? That's when we hear the text is mostly at weddings. 1 Corinthians 13. No, the context for 1 Corinthians 13 is much what we have right now in our society. A lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion as Paul, the writer, the great missionary who wrote this letter to a church at Corinth, in Corinth, Greece. He's writing this letter, and he writes 1 Corinthians 13 into a situation that has a lot of confusion, a lot of similarities to what we see right now, a lot of polarization. The church at Corinth was full of confusion. People taking sides, people overstepping their bounds, people not being nice to each other, saying nasty things about Paul even. People are jealous of the gifts that others have been given. This is a church that is even winking at an immoral situation that was unbelievable even by that day's standards. These people don't get along. So the entire church situation in Corinth is dysfunctional. And in the middle of it all, Paul is addressing the dysfunction and confusion, and he inserts 1 Corinthians 13 in between 1 Corinthians 12 and 1 Corinthians 14. It's almost like here's an aside, because in 12 and 14, again, addressing this dysfunction and confusion. So 1 Corinthians 13 is far from a wedding text. It's actually a mild rebuke. You can hear the rebuke as Paul writes this. You see, Paul writes 1 Corinthians 13, this chapter that we know as the love chapter, because people don't love each other. They're not loving each other. He's seeing a church that has no love for the other person. And it's evident in the way that they're treating each other. It's evident in all the things that he's addressing in this letter. So in that light, here is what he says. I'm only going to read a part of 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak human or angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so that I can move mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. And if I give away all my possessions, and if I give over my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. You hear it in Paul's words? This church is a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal in Paul's ears. They are nothing. They are doing all of these things, speaking in tongues, having a lot of faith. They have the gift of prophecy, giving away possessions. They're promoting a disciplined lifestyle, all those things that we think should be good and normal in a church. But there is no love there. And Paul says, you know what? All of that's pointless. You might as well not do any of it. You don't have love. You see, love is patient. You're impatient. Love is kind. You're unkind. Love does not envy. You're full of envy. And arrogant, rude, boasting. It's quite apparent from the rest of 1 Corinthians that this is all there in that church. They do keep a record of wrongs. I mean, I could go on and on in this list, but this church is not any of what Paul is saying love is right here. Love is not their MO. It's not their default position. If it was, he wouldn't even be writing it right now. In fact, if they had love for each other, makes you wonder, would he even have had to write 1 Corinthians as a letter at all? To quote a philosopher of the 80s, this is the way love is. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You see, love puts up with a lot. It believes the best about the other person. It hopes for the best for the other person and works toward the best for that person. It sees the bigger picture and loves the person because we're all going the same direction. So you see, 1 Corinthians 13 speaks into our confusion here on May the 1st, this first day of lifting of restrictions, and we need its message. I have heard and seen a lot, even in just the last 24 hours, both fear and freedom. We need 1 Corinthians 13 because we are going to be tested. We live in a polarized world, and it was polarized before coronavirus. But now this is bringing it to the surface, and it's going to test our love for each other. It's going to test our love for our neighbor here in Los Fresnos. Those who are wearing masks versus people that aren't wearing masks. We're going to be tempted to judge people. If we're a mask wearer, we're going to be judging people who aren't wearing them. And if we're not a mask wearer, we're going to be judging the people that are wearing them. Those who continue to take precautions are going to be judgmental against those who aren't, and vice versa, those who social distance and those who don't. In the past 24 hours, I've heard and seen it from both sides. And some of it may be even, political. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's wrong to have an opinion. It's okay to have a strong opinion. And I'm not even suggesting that you keep your opinion to yourself. It's okay to voice this. But that's not the point here. What I'm suggesting through the lens of 1 Corinthians 13, especially since it was written into a polarized situation, that we take a deep breath regardless of our opinion. That we take a deep breath, and through the lens of 1 Corinthians 13, that we love the other guy. We give grace to the other guy. The guy whose opinion I don't agree with, I give him grace, I give him love, I treat him as a friend. Don't allow your heart and mind, again, through this lens, do not allow your heart and mind to make prejudgments about the other guy who is or isn't doing X, Y, or Z. If that guy is not wearing a mask and I think he should be, I am still called to set aside the prejudice and love him or her anyway. If I'm asked to put on a mask before I go into an establishment or a home, then I love that person anyway. I love them. I give them grace. I acquiesce to what they're requiring of me in that instance. I am to think the best and work for the best and hope for the best of that other person, regardless of what I think about their opinion. I am here, the church is here, to pursue that person's peace. This is the gospel. And this is what Jesus did for us. And he still does for us every day of our lives. Jesus has every right. He has every bit of a right to judge me. And he doesn't. He died for me. He doesn't hold my sin over my head. And with this whole social distancing thing, we're not talking about sin here. It's not sin to have one or the other positions. We're not talking about sin here, but it does give us a rubric for which we are to treat our neighbor. Jesus doesn't hold sin over my head. He forgives it. And that's the way we are for our neighbor, even when sin is not involved. We are graced. We've been graced by Jesus in order to grace others. We've been given life. We've been forgiven forgiveness, the same forgiveness that is offered and given to my neighbor. So I treat him with the same kind of love. And in the same, as he needs that same forgiveness, I treat him the same way that I've been treated by Jesus, because we both of us need Jesus in the same way. And so I'm working for his good. I'm gracing him, because this is the way I've been treated in Jesus. All of us equally need Jesus, including my neighbor, regardless of our opinions or positions in this new normal. So that's today's conversation at the table. Let me read this again. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. That's a description of what Jesus has been for us. And so we do this for our neighbor. as Jesus has done this kind of love for us. We are loved by Jesus for the love of Los Fresnos. So I encourage you to leave your comments here, leave your prayer requests here, or message me, and we'll be praying for you today. Check out the other conversations at the table right here on our Facebook page, and then join us on Sunday, 10:30. We'll be right here with our online service of the Table of Los Fresnos. So this first day of May, this first day of lifted restrictions, stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected. We are loved by Jesus for the love of Los Fresnos. You have a fantastic Friday afternoon.